and inshallah ta'ala bringing some awareness and presence to the session. So we're going to take some deep breaths. Just feel your feet on the ground. So we're breathing in from the bottom of the belly. Just pausing, breathing out. Breathing in from the bottom of the belly again. Pausing, breathing out. And this from this more grounded state, the state of being connected to the ground, and our hearts and our aspirations being connected to the sama, which is the divine fiat and the divine decree. So we are simultaneously taking the means, and we are opening ourselves up through tawakkul and relegating the ultimate outcome of the affair to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So from this connected state, both through the ground and to the heavens, we'll make our intentions. And what is it that we're intending? We're intending true knowledge. And all true knowledge is always a knowledge of disclosure. فَعَلَمَ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. Know that there is nothing worthy of worship except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And note the way I translated that is only one facet of La ilaha illallah. Because the scholars say the more our hearts opens up, then the more the reality of that negation and that affirmation becomes encompassing. So I spoke of worship, but there is something higher, which is La maqsood illallah. There is nothing to be sought except Allah. Then there is La mawjood. There is nothing in absolute existence except Allah. And there is La mashhood. And there is nothing to be witnessed except Allah, i.e. from that position of absolute existence also coming and through us, bringing us into being. So the goal is to witness and ta'bud Allah ka'annaka tara, to worship Allah as though you see Him. فَإِن لَمْ تَكُنْ تَرَاهُ فَإِنَّهُ يَرَاكَ. And if you cannot see Him, know that He sees you. So this knowledge of a disclosure is what we seek, to see things as they really are. Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqa warzuqna ittiba'a. Oh Allah, show us things as they truly are, and give us the ability to follow through with what that disclosure is asking of us. Allahumma arina al-batila batina warzuqna ijtinaba. And show us falsehood as falsehood, and give us the ability to abstain, having realized falsehood as what it is. Having realized the nida, innama nahnu fitna, the call of falsehood, which says we are truly only a trial. فَلَا تَكْفُرْ. So do not be of those who disbelieve and who are ingrates. So we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala align us to this nurani, this illuminative form of knowledge, and that He connect us to the hearts that are full of this illumination. The rijal of Allah, the nisa of Allah, the men and women of Allah who have realized their humanity through realizing this innate light, and who are connected through that innate light to those who are connected to that light, those who are connected to that light, going all the way back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that we be connected to, through these hearts and these lights, through the understandings of the ultimate sources of this religion, which is the Quran and the Sunnah. And we seek all of this, what for? ابتغاء لوجه الله, purely and utterly for the sake of Allah, لا لشيء دونه, not for anything else besides. And so in this spirit we intend to be people who engage with ilm ta'lim, knowledge and learning, nafa intifada, service to ourselves and to others, and we intend all of this for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we're just going to go in for just a minute, just to make these intentions true in our hearts, and then we'll start the lesson. Bismillah. فاتحة بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق ناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله حق قدره مقداره العظيم اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا من فضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. Alhamdulillah. So in following the order of the aphorisms, we did the fourth of the aphorisms of Ibn Ata'illah last week, and we broached the topic of tadbir. And we mentioned tadbir isn't not taking the means, because if there is an element of planning involved with regards to means, this is praiseworthy. But the tadbir that becomes blameworthy is the tadbir, and it's in the word tadbir, that is premised on the outcome of our efforts and the means. And insofar as we are anticipating and attached and seeking to control an outcome in any endeavor, and this is the recipe for suffering and dysfunction. This is the recipe for anxiety. And what's very interesting, we were blessed here in the UAE recently by a visiting teacher who's involved in management consultancy. His name's Ibrahim Etzko Shwaitima. He's also a spiritual teacher as well, but he's pioneered this whole process called the care and growth method, which essentially is how to manage things in the best way, which comes back to our interactions with people. We're always interacting with people. There are elements of tarbiyah, interacting with people at every facet, whether it's in an organization, whether it's within our homes. The Prophet ﷺ said, all of you are shepherds, and all of you in some capacity are shepherds over your flock. So his whole method, and please permit this slight digression because it's connected to the idea of tadbir here. His whole method, called the care and growth method, is that generally speaking, anyone in a subordinate position, anyone in a position seeking to benefit from their people above them who are in a position of responsibility would have some theme which is falling into like a harder theme, which could be called growth, and another theme which is a softer theme called care. And if you think about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is raising us, right? And the word Rabb implies tarbiyah, which is to raise you from station to station to station to station into a place of takmil, they call it, completion. Then he's doing that through the manifestations of his names in different capacities. And some of them have a harder theme, Jalal, and some of them have a softer theme, Jamal. And sometimes the hard, in fact, never is the hard ever completely separate from the soft. So in the Jalal, there is Jamal, and in the Jamal, there is often a Jalal. And some people have drawn an analogy between the yin and the yang and the depiction of the black and the white symbolism there. But the way it's relevant here to our discussion is we were blessed to have this person give us an introduction to the care and growth method. And even in the context of organizational dynamics, of management, he said, your role is only to take the means. It's when a person starts attaching the outcome as being a priority to their immediate engagement with people's hearts and to take the means that organizations often start failing. So this element of tadbir, not busying yourself with what is ultimately Allah's business, right? In the last lesson, we quoted Baron Katie too. There's only two types of business, your business and God's business. And your business effectively are the means, insofar as you see yourself as being an agent of being able to do things. But God's business is the outcome. And so when you busy yourself with the outcome in any endeavor, not just in the spiritual life, and we're focusing on the spiritual life, but really these are qawa'id al-mutlaq, these are absolute rules that apply in any endeavor, in relationships, in organizations, in any endeavor. So in the context of what we're doing in the psychological interaction. And so this idea now of tadbir that we covered in the previous lesson is now also going to be explored in this aphorism, but in the context of that which often preoccupies our hearts, which is sustenance. The idea of what we think we should get from this world in terms of material sustenance. And of course, that same concept can be taken into the spiritual world, the idea of what we think we should get from the spiritual path, because rizq, the idea of sustenance, is of both varieties. And both varieties, once again, if you attach your expectations and your sense of control to an outcome, is blameworthy. Now that seems paradoxical, because one of the whole premises of entering or seeking the spiritual path is because there's something you want to acquire. You want to attain unto. You are seeking something, and that's why the very word murid, which is often used for spiritual aspirants, is someone who has irada. There's a sense of desire. How can desire not be there unless there is something you want to attain? And this is why it's very important here that our seeking itself not come from that mindset, which is the very thing that's actually veiled us from that which we seek. It's a bit of a paradox, the spiritual path in this regard. Because if we are approaching the spiritual path from the mindset of, I need this, then we're not allowing for the very present reality that if we just busied ourselves with the means that are present, and as to go back to the previous hikam, arrih nafsaka min at-tadbir, just relax. Engage in effort, but engage in effort without attachment to outcome, and see your effort itself as being your practice of ubudiyah, your love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and relegate the results to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then things will go smoothly, and you might just find that which you're seeking is always there. Is always there when we learn to rest and we learn to surrender, because nothing really veiled us except waham, except delusion. And so much of the spiritual path is an undoing of that delusion, as opposed to, I have to conquer and attain. Because if I have to conquer and attain, then I'm augmenting what? The I, which is the very thing that's stopping you from attaining the reality of the spiritual path. So we can't get round a sense of seeking, because why do we seek? And seeking in some elements is perpetual. Even in the spiritual path, they say, when you arrive unto a reality, and there is a sense of arrival, there is an arrival unto a homecoming of the heart, but that heart then seeks or continues to journey in that homecoming. This is why the scholars even say that your arrival, and they disclose, they demarcate the journeying as two. One is the journeying unto God, and they say the other is the journeying in that presence, when you attain unto presence. Because when they say that unto your Lord is the ending, then your Lord is forever disclosing himself. And so it becomes a journeying in this hayra, in this wonderment and amazement. But the idea isn't that this journeying not come from the ego. So both legs, even the first leg, when we're trying to have some kind of freedom from the ego, some type of realization of our own primordiality, a realization of who we are and what we're created for, then we have to also understand that at some level, that deep sense of who we are, that was what we were born upon. Kullu mawludin yulad ala fitra. Every child was born upon this. That same verse in the Quran, when it speaks about fitra, says, La tabdila li khalqillah. There is no fundamental altering of that element of fitra. The fitra doesn't change. Our own accessibility to it changes. It's as if the sun continues to shine. But if we take the clouds that have occluded us from the sun as being more real than the sun, then we're veiled. But the clouds come and go. Our identities and our egoic fixations can shift. And that is the essence of the spiritual path. And so we're going back once again to what are these aphorisms really about? They come back to that emptying of that ego. We're trying to undo that ego. We're trying to do tajreed, right? In our terminology, tajreed, a kind of layer by layer removal of that which isn't actually who we are anyway, but where we've come to live from. So now the fifth aphorism starts off by saying, and it's specifically about another element that you could say it's a subcategory of tadbir that generally becomes what we busy ourselves with. Ijtihaduka fima dumina laka. He said, you're striving for that which has been already guaranteed to you. And I'll come back to this, but here it means sustenance. It means risk. And this comes back to the understanding that both in a spiritual and in a physical, in the material sense, our sustenance is decreed for us in this world. Now, this may raise quite a few questions in terms of predestination and free will, but that's not the theme of this insofar as the general resolution to that question is still that you continue to act in what you experience as your free will. But it doesn't change the fact that there is a sense, and there's a huge debate about how that interaction happens, and this is one of the asrar, one of the secrets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But there is a sense of your sustenance coming through divine decree. This is based on a hadith, and more importantly, this Quranic verse that says, وَفِي السَّمَاءِ رِزْقُكُمْ وَمَا تُوعَدُونَ, which is in Surah Al-Dhariyat, that in the heavens is your sustenance and whatsoever you are promised. Now, what does it mean? The ulama say, when it says in the heavens is your rizq or your sustenance, this is the understanding that your provision is decreed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what the ishara to the heavens is. And it's saying that whilst you have to engage in this world, the world of means, the true source in terms of what you attain from your sustenance is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that applies just as much to the spiritual path as it applies to the material path. And sustenance here means what you avail, not what you amass. The delusionary nature of this world is we think we own something when we amass it. But what came to you as your sustenance is this world is what you directly availed. You might have a massive house. You might have a palace that you think you own. I've got the title deed. I have a title. But your sustenance is that bed that you sleep in, that palace in the night, right? You don't have the ability to create replicants of yourself and simultaneously experience the sensory comfort of sleeping in multiple beds at the same time. So your risk is that one bed. Your risk is whatever food you can put in your mouth. And you might have a palace, but on that one bed, your risk translates to a night full of anxiety and an inability to sleep except through medication. So this idea of the image of I have this, I have that, I own this, and this is somehow my provision. No, your provision is your direct experience that you have throughout your world, throughout your anfas, and which is also a provision, the number of breaths you have in this world. And part of that provision also is, how did you use those breaths? Because that's your spiritual capital. That's your real element of what you really benefit from in this world. So given this idea that there is a sense of what Allah is going to give us from a sense of provision, then when we busy ourselves with the provision, then what is it a sign of? اجتهادك فيما ضمن لك وتقصيرك فيما طلب منك. You're striving for what has already been guaranteed for you, your provision, i.e. the outcomes of the means, this direct sense of what I take from this world or what comes to me in the spiritual path. If you strive for that, then if you're striving for that in the absence of doing what is tuliba mink, in absence of doing what is asked of you, and what is asked for you is that you, instead of busying yourself with the outcome, you busy yourself with what you experience from the level of your agency, your free will, in worshipping Allah, in choosing the path of taqwa, in orientating yourself towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you do that at each moment, then you're busying yourself with what's asked of you. But if you don't, and you busy yourself with outcomes, then this is dalilun ala intimas al-basirati mink. Then this is simply a sign, or as an evidence, of the blurring of your spiritual insight. And ultimately, this journeying requires a sense of the perspicacity, the ability to see things as they really are. The ability to, and so basira, some of you know a bit of Arabic, you'll see the word basira is linked to the word basar. That's why Ibn Ajiba says here, al-basiratu nadhiru al-qalbi. The basira, or spiritual insight, is the ability to see things from the heart. كما أن البصر ناظر القالب. Just as eyesight is the seeing of the bodily sense. فالبصيرة لا ترى إلى المعاني. And so the basira, the spiritual insight, sees the spiritual meanings that have been set up in form. They understand what's really being meant by the sensorial world in terms of what it's transmitting to us of meanings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَالْبَصَرُ لَا يَرَى إِلَّا الْمَحْسُوسَاتِ. But the physical eye doesn't see except the physical. Now, of course, when your basira is illuminated, then when you glance through the physical, then your basira is with the basar. So you are seeing things, but the physical becomes a bridge to the meanings. This means the more one's heart becomes illuminated, their gaze isn't the same as someone else's gaze whose heart is darkened through seeing physical alone, or through being attached to physical alone. And so just as the gaze of a heart that's darkened and full of malice has efficacy in a negative sense, we call it the ayn, the negative sense, the evil eye, then similarly there is the benevolent eye, which is the gaze of someone whose heart is full of light. ألا يالله بنظرة من العين الرحيمة تداوي كل ما بي من أمراض السقيمة. Oh Allah, we ask for a nadra, we ask for a gaze from the gazes or the eyes of mercy, which can rectify and heal us of what is within us of ailments. So just as if you see a person who has, you go to a gathering, this is one of the reasons why they say you should go to spiritual gatherings. Because if you go to spiritual gatherings of dhikr, it's not just the aspect of you doing dhikr, but you can be hopeful that in those gatherings are people whose gazes, when they look at you, will be a type of rectification for you too, the very aspect of their gazes. So here, the basira is that aspect which is latif, which is subtle. And the basar is that aspect which is kathif. And just of interest here, because we're doing the psychology of Sulūk, we were discussing this idea of gazing. So there's actually an interesting psychologist. His name's John Prendergast. And, he's had a spiritual practice as well. And so he realized that there is actually a therapeutic benefit if he can bring himself into his heart presence, in gazing from that heart presence on his clients. And he actually turned this into a modality called benevolent gazing. And only in America you probably get insurance to cover something like that. But apparently he had clients, and he would start off with half an hour of or 15 minutes of just the client being brought in a state of relaxation. And then he would just, not in a non-threatening way. See, most of us associate gazes as invasions of privacy. But he said, if this idea of going into this, he called it non-dual presence, a presence that is not localized, and the presence that's expansive, and he calls it the expansive heart, and just gazing from that. And he actually compiled a lot of kind of probably in hopes to try and bring this into some kind of evidence-based research, surveys from his clients who would positively respond inevitably as this being a good way to start the session. And so I'm not quite accessing the chat, but if you can just search for John Prendergast, you might come across some of his research. But this idea of the gaze. And so similarly, when the spiritual path, Ibn Ajiba says, فَإِذَا أَرَادَ اللَّهُ فَتْحَ بَصِيرَةِ الْعَبْدِ, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to open up this spiritual insight of the slave, أَشْغَلَهُ فِي الظَّاهِرِ بِخِدْمَتِهِ, then he busies him outwardly through the sense of service. Not the sense of what's coming to me. This is another thing that Sheikh Ibrahim Shwaitma said yesterday. He said, when we engage in ourselves as giving, then this inevitably brings a dynamic when we are free from this sense of the ego, because we engage ourselves in giving, and that itself is the gift. And that's when the ata, that's when the gifts from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala come, because they find a heart that is in a state of readiness to receive, because it's in a state of giving. But when we're engaging from a position of our attention being, what can I take? And this actually comes back, one of the deeper principles of this aphorism also comes back to not having a transactional relationship with Allah. And that's actually because we're so conditioned by what seems a Western monoculture of I did it my way, or what is in it for me, that we carry this on into our fundamental relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I worshipped you, therefore I expect this. I tried all of this ibadah and it didn't work out because I didn't get this. Without recognizing, and we're going to go to in the next aphorism, even the idea of dua. Dua is not a weaponized wish list from God that we hold God to account because he's meant to give it to us. The dua is mukhul ibadah. A dua or supplication is itself a gift in that it gives us an opportunity to demonstrate our slavehood, which is why the very ability to call upon Allah through a state of ittirar. They say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself says that he is mujib. He's the one who answers, muttar, the one who's in a state of desperation, idha da'a, when he calls upon him. But that answering is not going to come in the way we think. That answering is coming because that very state itself, that state of ubudiyah, necessitates rububiyah. When you are an abd, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes to you with the rububiyah, And that very nature of rububiyyah will always give you everything you need in exactly the way you need, in the way that's best for you, because that's rububiyyah, not in the way you think is best for you. You might still be hell-bent on this has to come in this way and that way, and I need this and I need that and I need this, and the divine wisdom knows what's better for you. That actually what you need is for this not to come, and what you need is a bit more of this, a bit more of the jalal, sometimes the jamal with a bit of jalal. And all of this could even be blocked from a position of what's better for you, in much the same way a benevolent parent responds to the needs of the children from their greater vantage point of what the children really needs, not the immediacy of the child crying for another chocolate, because they know if the child gets another chocolate, that's actually harming the child. And so this idea of the basira being opened means a person becomes busied with khidmah, devotion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in his inward be mahabbatihi, loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And true love just wants to be with the beloved. Is love, even in our Western notion of love, when was the last time a transactional relationship was considered to be true love? And that's why the ulama of Sufism, they often give these analogies of, somebody's coming to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in very much the nature of people may interact with aspects of this world. So in the company or in the court of a king, the king has various people under him, and they're all performing acts of obedience and devotion to the king. And the king says to one of them, what do you want? And they say, well, I just want to make sure that, no harm comes to me, king, because I don't want to. So the king said, okay, I'll provide some protective assurances and no harm will come to you. And he was happy with that. Now the person comes and says, king, I just want more and more land for my family. I want treasures. King says, okay, you've worked well, you deserve this. So one wanted protection from harm and the other wanted to be given more and more things. And then the third is asked, what do you want? And he says, I just want to be with you because I love you. Well, might sound inappropriate to say that to the king, but maybe there's that essence of, I just want to be with you, king. Just keep me in your service. Now, how would the king feel? The king would, of an automatic nature of acceptance of that love, protect him from harm and give him what he has to give him of gifts. But the deeper undercurrent there is sincerity, because that third person in all of his service was doing it for the king, not for himself. That's why many of the Sufis say, وَعْبُدُ اللَّهِ لِلَّهِ لَا لِإِلَّهِ. Worship Allah for Allah, not for a illa. Illa is a causal condition that comes back to you. Because if it's a illa, a causal condition that comes back to you, then your ibadah is on an edge. What does it mean to be on an edge? It means it's premised on something to do with you. It's not grounded in the middle, which is, I'm not dependent on anything of this world, because this world is given to flux. And if you're given to flux, then you're on the edge. And there are those alladhina ya'budun Allah ala harfin. There are those who worship Allah on an edge. Because when it doesn't go their way, their entire edifice of ibadah collapses. And we have these archetypes, and obviously they're true stories, but they have archetypal importance, which means meaning importance, throughout the Quran, starting from the sense of shaitan himself. Shaitan outwardly was given to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a way that placed him in the ranks of the angels. right? There's a difference of opinion. We don't want to go there into the origin narration of shaitan, but there is an agreement that he was an abid. He was one who was devoted to outwardly worshipping Allah. Ibn Kathir says that there wasn't a place on earth that he didn't make sajda of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he's raised into the companionship of the angels. But when he's ordered to bow down to Adam alayhi salam, which is really bowing down to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because it was sajdatul ihtiram, it was a bowing down to the khalq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by the command of Allah. So it was a bowing down of respect, not bowing down in literal sense of worship to Adam, but in that respect there was worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and shaitan couldn't get himself to do it. Why? The clue's in the first word. He says, Ana khayrun min. I'm better than him. I'm better than him. Which is why the ulama say, all of those years he was bowing down, outwardly he was bowing down, but inwardly he was marveling at his ana in the bowing down. He's bowing down, and the real idol is, man, am I not such a great worshipper? So his ana has got inflated. His ana has got so inflated, it wasn't bowing down to Allah. Someone asked a question, who are you bowing down to? This is what our teachers say. Who do you bow down to in sajda? Is it even a conscious bowing down? Is it an automated up and down? This is a question I'm asking myself. Because Allah says to make iqama, to affirm something in the prayer, not just to go up and down. It's not mujarrad al-harakat. It's not up and down. Or is it even a bowing down where there's a sense of the idol of the heart? Oh, sorry, not the idol of the me. Just really bowing down to my own image of me being such a worshipper. And when that image gets turned on its head, because the goal isn't your self-image, the goal is Allah. Which is why, what do you say when you're in the sajda? Subhana Rabbiyal A'la. Subhana Rabbiyal A'la. How transcendently glorious is my Lord, Al-A'la, the one who is raised and esteemed. Not you, not me. And so here, the idea is, when someone is busied outward with service and inwardly with love, قوي نور البصيرة. The light, the illumination of the heart becomes strengthened. حتى يستولي على البصر. Until then, that light of the heart, the insight, the spiritual heart, becomes overcoming of even the outside, even the eyesight. And so when such a person, فَيَغِيبُ نُورُ الْبَصْرِ فِي نُورِ الْبَصِيرَةِ. So the eyesight, the light of the eyes, which is based also on a kind of interaction with physical light, becomes engulfed with this transcendent light of the heart. فلا يرى إلا ما ترى البصيرة من المعاني اللطيفة والأنوار القديمة. So when the gaze of this Arif looks at things, this man who knows Allah, this woman who knows Allah, through a heart that's infused with light, they're taking in a lot more than the likes of me. They're taking in a lot more than the likes of me. And that's why Shaykh al-Darqawi, one of the things he said is, when you increase in hiss, in physicality, you decrease in ma'na, you decrease in meaning. And when you increase in meaning, you decrease in physicality, not from a position of you don't see the physical world, but the physical world becomes infused with meaning, which means even when you partake in physicality, it becomes a deeply, deeply, deeply spiritual act. And at its fundamental level, this is why our prayer is a physical prayer. But to infuse it with the meaning, so that the meanings become unfolding, not from an abstract, cognitive, rationalistic that I have to think at that moment. No, it's alive. The meanings come to you by the very nature of the physical being incorporated in the spiritual. So these unfoldings of ma'ani, these unfoldings of deeper and deeper meanings in the nature of those physical acts in prayer. That's why many of the ulama said, what is the prayer? There's a reason why the word salah is connected to sila, connection, because the prayer that doesn't increase you in connection, and more importantly, that presence, hadratul qalb, that presence which recognizes things as they really are, isn't really a prayer in its spiritual sense at all. I mean, some of the fuqaha didn't mandate this, but some of the early madhahib, they did. They said if your prayer doesn't have a moment of some sila or connection or presence or khushur, pray again. Right? The fuqaha didn't mandate this generally amongst these scholars of the jurists because it makes things a bit easier. Otherwise, you would be stuck redoing a lot of prayers. Some of us, even though some of the spiritual. The other day, someone was telling me that his teacher, when his heart got activated, and he just looked back at his life and he said, for all this time, I just really wasn't praying. So at a personal level, obviously, this is the fatwa. He just started redoing all his prayers from years and years and years, because he said that wasn't really praying. But now with a heart that's activated, that understands prayer, I know what prayer is, so I'm going to go back all of those years and redo those prayers. That's not a hukam. That's not a fatwa in any of the four madhabs. That's a personal position he took from his vantage point. But we have choices. We either augment light, or the absence of light is darkness. And so here Ibn Ajiba says, when a person is veiled and is given to khidlan, abasement, فَلَا يَرَى إِلَّا الْحِسْ, they don't see anything except the physical. Atheism is fundamentally an illness. It's a malady of darkness, a paradigm that doesn't allow for transcendence and divine is a fundamental delusion premised on a lack of light. And he says, one of the dimensions of that, and this is the relevance for us in this aphorism, Ibn Ajiba says, فَيَجْتَهِدُ فِي طَلَبِ مَا هُوَ مَضْمُومٌ مِنْ رِزْقٍ مَقْسُومٍ. So the person starts really busying themselves with provision. I need to get this. I need to get that. I need to get this. And much of our modernity is actually premised on busying yourself with provision. Even the nature of education has been so commercialized, and we educate ourselves. And so why? So I get a degree, so I get a job, so I get a salary. The word education has at its root illumination. Educare means to bring light. How are you bringing light if your end goal is I need this, I need this, I need this to get the salary, to get the job, to get security, all of which is premised on darkness? Because the sense of Allah being the provider is not in the equation there. And if you sought knowledge for knowledge, and as a result, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, you engage in knowledge, engage in professions, learn, and make that your goal from some dimension for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Of course, your risk comes as a result of that. And it's connected to that. And what is meant to come to you will come to you. But if you premise the educational undertaking from a position of materiality that you are already anxious to get and worried that you might miss out on, what education is actually happening here? We separate education from information gathering, education from certifications that we can brand ourselves by. But what is actually happening at the level of illumination of that heart? And La ilaha illallah, one of the things I learned from my teachers, is mundarijun. It takes every single form of education. If it's true, connects to La ilaha illallah. We don't relegate that to spiritual education only, as if the material world, as if physics, chemistry, biology, economics, psychology doesn't also have at its highest level some level of connection to fa'lam annahu la ilaha illallah. But when we accept paradigms that have arisen out of darkness, the secularist project, the idea that the fragmentation of these worldly sciences, or the natural sciences being some case of reduction, a reductive kind of way of looking at nature, or the social sciences, which basically negates any sense of meaning in this world, but you then bring about your own meaning through your own ego or your own desire to build your. All of this is darkness upon darkness upon darkness that is arising in many cases out of a paradigm and a journeying, a civilization journey of darkness, which primarily was what happened to Western Europe, a negation of God and God's agency, and then an aversion or an inversion or a further perversion of that thing. But that's coupled also with, in a materialist sense, these same civilizations dismantling the Muslim world and we accepting these paradigms. But we have to go back to this paradigm of light. Because if a person is engaged and engages with this ijtihad, striving for that which is madmun, dumina laka, it's been guaranteed to you. Don't busy yourself with material provisions and even spiritual provisions, what is meant to come to you from Allah. Don't busy yourself with the warid, that which is going to come to you from Allah, but busy yourself with the wird, that which is sought from you in your journeying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you continue to do that, then this becomes a state of the blurring of our spiritual insight. Intimasul basira. And of course, at its highest level, if a person becomes completely given to the state, well, huwa al-kufr. This is disbelief. Becomes so blurred, the person doesn't see any of this. Wa'a'udhu billah. And that's why we end here with this quote from Shaykh Abu Hassan al-Shadhili. He said, Al-basiratu kal-basar, spiritual insight is like the eyesight. Adna shay'in yaqa'u fihi yamna'u an-nazar. The slightest thing that falls in your eye, it prevents your eye from seeing. So similarly, if a slightest thing that falls in your heart of attachments to other than Allah, then it prevents the spiritual eyesight from seeing things as they really are. So one of the ultimate recipe here is ar-ridha bi ikhtiyar. Just be content with what Allah is choosing from you, from risk. That's His choice, and He was looking after you from non-existence. He was looking after you when you were in your mother's womb. He was looking after you when you exit the womb, and you were cared for by your parents. And He will continue to look after you. And it's only when you arrogate to yourself the management of what you think you need to get that ta'liman, many ways as a benevolent way of Him teaching us, things seem to go in a way that we need a few lessons. So subhanak wa bihamdik subhanal azim wal asr inna al-insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihati wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr. I'll leave it floor open for about half an hour. So any questions, comments on what I said or didn't say, please feel free to come off the mic. And if Hiba, if you can just see, maybe if people know to raise their hands, if you can raise your hand if you want to speak, then Hiba will unmute your mic. And Hiba, if you can keep it unmuted while I'm speaking, because I often want to go back to them to see if they want to have a bit of a dialogue, inshallah ta'ala. Imran, you've got your hand raised.
Assalamu alaikum, Sidi.
Wa alaikum salam, rahmatullah.
How are you?
Good, mashallah.
Alhamdulillah. I wanted to ask you, Sidi, about with some kind of talking therapies that we see, there's almost an encouragement to seek values or to encourage the person to identify what their values are. and encourage them. For example, they could like going to the gym or um, particular voluntary sort of vocational activities. And the idea there is that if they take them up, they tend to feel a bit better about themselves. And I just wanted to get your opinion on whether you think this is part of that transactional type approach, or tadbiri approach in in sort of where where you're thinking, if I take up some of these things that I value, I will feel better. I will sort of feel better about myself. It would encourage me to do more things. That kind of approach. What do you make of that?
Well, yes, subhanallah, the in my understanding, and that approach isn't necessarily wrong in and of itself, but the efficacy, and Imran, if you want to come back, just let me know if you want to come back to what I'm saying. But the efficacy of these things, when we say, what is it you value? These are often explorations first in a kind of self-knowledge, right? To inculcate in the client or whoever it is we're speaking to in this kind of interaction into maybe a spirit of inquiry, like what is it that they value, right? Maybe even as an engaged activity. Now, notice even in that question, it's not necessarily value for a result, right? It's what is it that is inherently giving you a sense of meaning that is somehow, and it doesn't need to be made explicit, it doesn't need to be explored in a very upfront way, but just in a simple, somebody finds value and practice in doing some kind of activity. And if that's where the person's coming from a connection, and it gives them a sense of, ultimately a sense of meaning, then that can be engaged with. And often, I'm trying to think who that person was who actually said this, but he was in a state of education. He was a prize-winning author on education. And he said the best things that actually have therapeutic efficacy is when the act itself or the practice itself is sufficient. As in, a person finds something so self-fulfilling in that practice of what they're doing that there's a sufficiency in it. And often, so the clues are often like, oh, it's like time just goes by and I feel so fulfilled. And you can't put a finger on it, but it was that sense of engaging in some creative activity or doing something that maybe was nourishing a part of the soul that wanted to do khidmah, wanted to be of service in some capacity. And it's so, this isn't necessarily tadbir, this is exploring with someone the realm of means. Now, if that same person was then to be, or some kind of transactional dimension was applied to that activity. Oh, you want to do this so you can get that. I mean, there could be some benefit if you were to explore this from a position of maybe emotions or feelings that are being associated with that activity. But I would harbor or think that a lot of these activities, if they have some kind of therapeutic kind of benefit for a client to explore and do themselves, and they just really feel good doing. I mean, just like, to an average observer, somebody says they're knitting, for example, right? Not many people perhaps knit today as they did. But if that practice of knitting was, you then come up with a really good looking sweater, or else, it would, I think people will get very sick of knitting very quickly. But you see, the people who enjoy knitting is that there's a enjoyment in the knitting itself. There is something that they're getting. And there is obviously an additional sense of joy if I can produce something like a sweater that I can give to the loved one at the end. But if the whole thing was premised on that sweater's acceptability from an aesthetic point of view, or that sweater's, I don't think such people are going to keep the knitting up for very long. So there is an inherent love in the practice. And so exploring these things, and this actually is relevant because we were discussing this literally with Etsko Shwetema yesterday, when he was saying, you want to first illustrate the joy of the actual means themselves. You want to bring about something benevolent and something that's nourishing in the means themselves. The results then often take care of themselves, right? In this case, in the therapeutic interaction, improved well-being. But if you put as a condition, and you made it a condition up front, let's see if this activity makes you feel better in a week's time. If it doesn't, okay, we'll shift to another one. It's as if you're nullifying the very beauty of that activity being premised on a practice without a goal, a practice of just being present. And often what causes anxiety is that we're not present. We're not allowing our heart to just rest in the presence without being attached to an outcome. And so these activities that are so nourishing and that take us out of this lack of presence, of being distracted from ourselves, paradoxically, just being immersed with activity, oh, I feel better. I can't put a finger on why I'm better, but maybe that because that's speaking to your heart and you're just engaging with it. It's not about the result. Does that help him run?
Yeah, it does. I think what struck me, I think last week, when you mentioned about a tadbiri attitude to healing, and I thought perhaps, uh, that someone with this attitude, it could be considered that, um, I guess I want to ask you just about what you mean by what would be an example of like that tadbiri approach to healing,
Right, right.
just as a sort of comparison, if that's
Yeah,
okay.
I can see, because I think what could have been heard, and somebody is maybe someone could sense any sense of prescription or any sense of determinate could be seen as tadbir. And I think the distinction between tadbir, even in terms of what we're saying, is we have to engage in means, right? Even in the therapeutic interaction, there are means that allow us to be more wholesome, that can connect ourselves to the heart, connect other people to their hearts. And so we engage in our modalities, we explore things like whatever practices, in this case, the examples maybe you want to try this, maybe you want to try that. But once again, whilst we're giving these potentially prescriptive, but more explorative kind of dimensions, if our self is already approaching it from a sense of control, like, I'm expecting my advice to produce a result. I'm expecting as a result that I have brought about, or I'm somehow deterministically bringing about through my advice. We're hoping, this probably is analogous to the whole idea of the spiritual path. We are hoping for healing. It's not a case of we're not hoping for healing in anything we're doing. We're hoping in the spiritual path to have this coming home to our souls, coming home to our hearts. But the just as in the spiritual path, what is it that often negates that is that mindset of the I, that controlling I, who is actually causing the distress. And so just as with the person opposite us, or the interaction, we're having therapeutic interaction, we're engaging in means, but we're also with the amri Allah. We're handing over the affair to Allah. And often when we hand the affair to Allah, Allah is more capable of healing than any modality that we think we have mastered. So it's subtle, but I'm not sure if I've given you something more specific. But in perhaps this example, explores certain things that the client might be interested in. But if I was to simultaneously then expect an outcome, in the sense that I'm thinking this has to produce that, and if it doesn't, then there's something wrong, it's like I'm not giving a chance for this grace to emerge here.
Mm.
And and also, some of the ways by which we ourselves are engaging with means is educational for the client. So if we're showing control, if we're showing, I'm not sure why this worked, maybe we try and bring a bit of an anxiety starts coming in, and this shouldn't have worked, and this should have happened this way. If we're showing we're open-ended, and let's see what happens. It's a discovery. And whatever comes of it will be informative. Then this is a kind of transmission, a kind of education in and of itself. Wallahu alam.
Barakallah fiqh, Sidi. That was very, very helpful.
Inshallah. Inshallah. Tarana, you've got your hand raised.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum.
Salam.
First, I want to thank for the last time, because there was an input about Sufism, and which I asked you, and the Orientalistic approach towards, and it was just a kind of eye-opener, and I read a lot of things since that time, so thank you again for that. And regarding this attraction, what the brother Imran Khan just mentioned, like somebody involving in exercises and he feels better. From a psychological perspective, I wanted to know, whenever they come, for example, clients, and they feel attracted, I'm not now talking about attraction for sports, for example, which might feel you better, but sometimes clients are attracted to things which are disturbing at the first glance. And obviously they blame themselves and everything, they feel depressed about it. And but after like deep analysis, you find out that it is rooted in most cases in their childhood trauma or something in a relation. Basically, most of them are rooted in parent relationship matters. And my question was, is not always any kind of attraction which we are going through in our life a hint towards what we need to nurture ourselves? It might be, in a psychological perspective, that if a person, for example, I had a case, he's a young Muslim, and he was very disturbed because he had homosexual tendencies. So getting to the root cause, it came out that it was all about a relationship between his father and him. So this attraction wasn't actually rooted in something negative, but it was a longing for the love of the father, which he didn't get. And once he realized it, he actually calmed down. So the longing stays. The longing actually for this male perception stays. Now he has to deal with it in a proper way. So my question is not always any kind of longing from our side. It has to be analyzed. And it's always a hint, even spiritually. It's a hint towards what we need to get this wheel out of our way, which are all our wheels through our upbringing and whatsoever. So once we find out the cause, we get to the root, and then we have to like calibrate ourselves again. I don't know. Can I?
No, I actually agree with you, but I think what happened with in terms of my interaction with Imran just previously, I was initially thinking maybe I should answer along the lines of what you've just said, but I don't think, and Imran's welcome to come in. I think in the way Imran phrased the question, it wasn't just a question, because the way you're mentioning it, Tarana, you're talking about when you're using the word attraction, which basically is the word desire, like the sense of desire, something you think a person needs. Here, what I understood from Imran was vocation, that there is a sense that, and there can be degrees in this too, but there are senses in our undertaking of tasks that also meets, at different levels, because, at a higher level, this could be something that could be done, that vocation could be looked at as, and so what is it that is giving you? Why is it giving you this sense of, but we have to meet people sometimes where they are. So, and the analogies that Imran, the way he framed his question was kind of this idea of people having certain activities that they find some kind of healing in. And so it was more a sense of vocation. Now, if a person came to me and they said, I need this, almost from an existential kind of thing, or there is angst otherwise, then you're right, because there's a lot more going on underneath it. And definitely in the realm of relationships, sexuality then obviously becomes a prism on that as well, because sexuality is often a prism to that sense of desire being mutated or affected, or is it kept in a wholesome way? That could be a prism too. But that, I completely agree with you. There is an emotional pathway there. And so one of the things that we did actually in the previous class with Cambridge Muslim College students, because we were exploring this kind of heart space more. So one of the questions we just first did a bit of guided meditation, and then we just threw out this question, which is, what is it that you want? And that sense of just being asked, what is it that you want? Now, almost all of us, maybe that's just my prism, but I feel almost all of us have a sense of woundedness or fractured understandings from the wholesomeness of our fitrah, which we were born with. So often the impulsive answer to what is it that you want becomes either an object, a person wants this or that to own, or a relationship, which is also objectified. I need this person in my life for me to be happy. Or at a high level, someone could then say, I just want peace, or I just want love. And that's such an underpinning, answer for many of us. I just want love. I just want to be loved. So then what happened after that, which I found was very interesting, and I'm almost wary to test it again, because it was coming from a place of, Allah made it, we were kind of, the guided meditation was in the space. So we said, we kind of said, okay, can we drop into that heart, that expansive heart? And from the position of that heart is that wanting true. And it was very interesting, because a few people said that the position of that heart had no wants because it was already at home. It was present. And they could reach out to that wounded self from that heart, and that wounded self could speak to the heart with compassion, because that's the energy of rahmah, right? The reaching out in a form of non-separation, that you're wounded, but the ground of your being is still me. La tabdila li khalqillah. Your fitrah may be obscured. Don't underestimate that presence of the fitrah to be present at this moment too, in the presence of with the woundedness being seen from that presence. If you're seeing from the woundedness, you're already taken by the woundedness. But how can it be seen from that presence to look at the woundedness? And you can say, ask that woundedness again. There's an emotional pathway there, and I think that's what you're speaking, Tarana. That, is it really true you want this? No, I'm identifying this thing as giving me happiness. But okay, this happiness, are you really sure from position of the presence of the heart, which is accessible? Maybe it's not accessible for all, but there are times when it can be accessible from the presence of this heart, that this feeling is not there already. This love is not present already. And it's from that heart then we see also, and this is where the many ways, and you brought back, there could be childhood memories, there could be pathways, there could be understandings by which we've lived that story or lived that thing, that I need this to be happy. That's different in many ways from, and maybe there's a kind of emotional maturity we want to build up in the clients, but there are times when it's just, you don't need to get into this kind of, straight away, because this could be really emotionally deep work. But there can be times, and this is what I took from my answer to Imran, that just as in kind of an ameliorative way, as an interim, to also explore vocations, engaged activity, as being ways by which a person feels more healed. So does that help? That's the distinction. I get what you're saying, Tarana, but the reason why I didn't go down that way was because I didn't want to introduce inquiry in the very real capacity for vocations to also provide healing. And so also, Imran, if you want to come as a corrective, see the difference we're saying here, in case Hibab also just unmute Imran. But Tarana first, did that help?
Yeah, of course, very much. It was actually in a corrective manner, in a positive corrective manner. I got him wrong. and it helped very much. And what you said, that very often I experience that from the beginning, from a therapeutic session, when a client comes, even if it's about sustaining and money and all these issues, and if we draw down the line, we see that it's all like insecurity, if he catches up with. And after a while, because what you said, Fitra, I ask sometimes my client after maybe a year, but this was your thought in the beginning, and then this was your thought, and then this, and shifted and shifted. So always you stand beside you and you watch your thoughts. So who are you actually in this whole process? And that's when I don't know if this is fitra, but that's when the client is like, he distances himself from his thoughts, because he realizes my thoughts are actually a product of all my experiences. And this is the first time when he feels like, okay, I seem to be something different, which I feel sometimes a very positive moment.
MashaAllah. No. Imran, did you want to say something?
The only thing, Celia, was that that's how you understood my my question correctly. It was about vocational activities and things that are sort of put there or encouraged to make one feel a bit better and more active.
Which has efficacy. We're trying to, everything has its role. So that's kind of what it was, right. Okay, inshallah. Any other, maybe one last question or comment from anyone? Or maybe there's no questions and comments. Make it good then. Okay, inshallah. That's a good place to stop then. بهذا القدر الكفاية لمن أدركته العناية سبحانك وبحمدك سبحان العظيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.